This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass.
Rundown!
I'm Carrie Saldo. Good morning. Welcome to this special Rundown edition where we're going to zoom in on some environmental reporting that's been happening in the 413 as of late. Joining us to do this, Bill Shein, the founder of the online site Reason Gone Mad. Independent reporter Sarah Robertson. Adam Hinds, a senior advisor at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate.
Well done.
And thank you. And Greta Jochem, investigations editor at the Springfield Republican newspaper. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
I'm glad to have you here. If you have thoughts while you're listening or watching our YouTube live stream, you can email us therundown@nepm.org. All right, coming up later in the show, some residents of Western Mass have concerns over state changes they say hamper their control of some proposed green energy projects. We have proposed federal changes to environmental protections and the impacts that could have for the 413. We'll be diving into that. And also how recycling pee, that's right, I did say the word pee, could lead to some much needed housing here in the 413. But first, we're going to start with a story. Bill Shein, you reported the headline. The state said it didn't do PCB blood testing. It had been doing it for years, however. And you point out that Massachusetts health officials told Berkshire County residents that PCB blood testing was, quote, very unusual and also unavailable. But you dug into some public records requests and you sought to find some more information, and you found information to the contrary. Tell us what you learned.
So this actually grew out of some reporting last year about the long public health, the history of public health involvement in Berkshire County related to PCB contamination in the Houstonic River from General Electric. And I was looking at a cancer study that DPH had promised that they had not delivered for about 5 years. And in the course of that, made a number of public records requests. I was totally unaware of biomonitoring programs in the state until they tried to withhold some documents, which were eventually released.
Ding, ding, ding. That sets up a red flag for journalists.
And it included talking points that they used in at events in Berkshire County when people would ask about blood testing for PCBs to get some sense of whether they had been exposed and to what extent. The talking points downplayed the availability of blood testing that the state had been doing beginning in 2014 with a biomonitoring program statewide. Now, blood tests of PCBs don't necessarily reveal, whether you'll get sick, when or where you were exposed. And like many other public health investigations into environmental contamination, very difficult to make the connection. However, for decades, people in Berkshire County have told me very disappointed in the public health response.
I've been at public meetings where Tim Gray, other river advocates, have asked for this again and again and again, and at some point even pushed to have GE pay for it because General Electric ultimately was the company that was responsible for dumping these PCBs into the Housatonic River. We know that they are suspected carcinogens and have a range of other health impacts. You also pointed out that there is a biomonitoring program that's ongoing through 2027. I jumped on the website, unclear as to whether the state is still accepting folks into that. But were you shocked to find out there was actually one going on right now?
There was. I was. And that program was initiated just a few weeks before some of the statements that DPH made that I reported on in the fall of 2024. But yes, they've told me they are still accepting people into that program. They will do collection events in Berkshire County. They did not have a great answer when I asked about why they had been downplaying it to Berkshire County audiences. They said, that the opportunities for exposure to PCBs in the Berkshires are limited, and did not really directly answer the question. While at the same time, of course, we're just beginning a 13-year rest of river cleanup that the EPA, very controversial in many respects.
In Lee, there is going to be a low-level toxic waste dump where some of these PCB particulates that are in the soil from the river are going to be contained. That was hugely controversial. Adam Hinds, I think you were a state senator while this was being debated. The state didn't have a huge say. It was a settlement between the federal government, GE, and the local cities and towns. But that being said, you were in office. So what do you make of the reporting that Bill has uncovered here?
Well,
I mean, thanks for doing it, first of all, Bill. I think that let's be clear. I mean, PCBs have been banned by the EPA since 1979 because of their known health effects. And so I think what's fascinating here is there's a bit of a crisis of confidence in our government to keep us safe, whether it's land, dirty land or air or water. And if there's an opportunity, why not? And we saw this in the Allendale school so in Pittsfield, where there was a previous dump. And
it's
it
now
was
an
done,
elementary school.
It's now, I've watched soccer games on top of where these now are placed. And there was blood testing in 2006 or 7, a small sample, but it shows that it's possible. And in a moment when you're trying to gain confidence that, okay, our community is going to be safe, my kids are going to be safe, this should be a part of the repertoire. You have, GE is on the hook for the Lee monitoring. They will be in perpetuity. And the EPA can demand that they do more. It's beyond just land and air samples. That's what was a part of Allendale. And so this feels like a no-brainer, and I'm glad that you've kind of uncovered this as a real addition to how you monitor.
And to your point about the Allendale testing, if memory serves, what they found in those blood samples was not particularly high levels or anything that was cause for concern as far as public health standards.
Well, there were a lot of questions raised about it, and the baseline of PCBs that they used to compare the results thereto. Activists out there have long complained about the testing that was done there, and that they suggested that it also downplayed the risks. Also, we should keep in mind the challenge of this testing is, testing people at Allendale would not include people who had perhaps lived near there for a long time and then left, people that had just arrived. So it's sort of the challenge of these kinds of public health investigations the people at DPH are up against. DPH has a terrific reputation across the country as some really highly qualified scientists. They are up against a public mood that is generally very suspect of institutions. But at the same time, things like this are exacerbating concerns that people have had in the Berkshires for a long time, that they're not being told a straight story.
Yeah. Sarah, Greta, you both have done a great deal of environmental reporting. Any thoughts on this before we move on to the next story?
I mean, it's expensive, right? Like, why? I want to almost try to think about why they would want to, I don't know, downplay the need for this blood testing.
Oh, as a question being is it a cost that's pushing?
Yes, is it cost? Is it just kicking the can down the road, as happens with so many environmental issues?
So a couple of things. So these biomonitoring programs, one from 2014 to 2019, and the one that began a couple of years ago and runs through 2027, funded by the Federal Centers for Disease, for the Federal CDC. Can't get that mouthful out this morning. Some of the activists that I talked to about this looked at the timeline and said, well, both this delayed cancer study and these biomonitoring programs and the downplaying of them happened at the same time that there was a lot of discussion, legal action about that dump in Lee. Over time, PCBs in blood degrade. The results that you will get later will show less, depending on ongoing exposure. They also pointed to that conflict between this 13-year cleanup. The EPA has called the Housatonic, an open toxic waste dump that we need to do something about, while DPH has said there's very little risk of exposure right now. So trying to reconcile that has raised a lot of concern and questions.
Well, certainly a topic we'll continue to talk about here on The Rundown. You can check out Bill's bigger story, The Uncertainty Machine, a story of PCBs, cancer, and doubt on the Reason Gone Mad website. Greta, I'm going to pull you in here. Some recent reporting you did, a headline that was attached to it, Seeing Red Over Green Power. And this is as the state is trying to streamline battery and solar permitting, and some residents are wary of these proposed projects. You co-reported this with Daniel Jackson for The Republican. One of the communities that you zeroed in on was Plainfield, and it's a small town about 25 miles east of Pittsfield, northwest of Northampton. Population, according to the census, 633 people. So a lot of land, not a lot of folks, right? And up until now, I think perhaps most notably known for all the beautiful stone walls that dot the village, but not necessarily green energy projects. So in terms of this, what are you looking at? What has changed? Because local residents, don't have as much say perhaps as they may have once had in oversight of these projects. So what's changed?
Yeah, so as the state is pushing towards, to get to 100% renewable energy by, I think it's
2050.
Yeah, thank you.
Net zero emissions.
Net zero,
Not 100%.
thank you. As part of that, they're trying to get more solar, more batteries. Obviously, batteries are super important if you're going to, capture solar energy for use later. And so one of the things the state has done has rolled out new regulations to try to help streamline the permitting process, because a lot of projects have gotten slowed down by, permitting at the local level. And so they're trying to streamline it, and a lot of smaller communities they feel like they're getting inundated by all these proposals, especially rural communities like Plainfield. Wendell had a project a while back. Blandford has a couple, and a lot of these people on these boards are volunteers, and they feel like they're getting overwhelmed. And there's a lot of trepidation from some people, at least, about the possibility of fires and safety and siting. Just the changes it could bring to a really rural area.
And from what I read in your reporting, and I've read in other reporting about this, Sarah, you've done reporting on some of these battery storage sites. The contractors are getting frustrated because they're saying, hey, look, we put this proposal forth. We feel like we've shown you what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, but it's taking you too long to do anything about it. So the state comes in, shorthand of your reporting here, and says, well, we're going to give you a year. And if you don't figure it out in a year, boom, you've got a permit. That's problematic, right? People are frustrated with that timeline and the pressure that's being that's being put on them. But what are companies saying about why they need, or why they think there's a need for these proposed developments outside of the net zero aspect? Is it all about money, or do they think these are great environmental wins? Like, what are they saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a money making opportunity in their business, but I mean, also from an environmental perspective, we really do need, more green energy, and we do need batteries and a way to harness that, if we're gonna avoid the worst effects of climate change. So yeah.
Yeah, and the technology is being developed really quickly, and it's changing really quickly, and you're asking, again, volunteer planning boards, conservation commissions, and boards of health to think through how they should be regulating new technologies. They're talking about like lithium-ion batteries being dangerous. Our board of health in Wendell was talking about trying to mandate only sodium-ion batteries, but companies were saying that no, that's not profitable for us. And so it's just like the technology is outpacing our ability to regulate it.
Well, and some cities and towns have said, oh, well, we're going to put a moratorium on this while we try and figure it out. Take a look, slow it down a little bit. Adam, do you think that maybe we're going to see legal challenges in the offing given what the state has done?
I'm nervous about this moment. We worked really
Why?
hard to make sure that we had aggressive regulations, aggressive incentive programs to ensure we could try to reach that goal of net zero emissions by 2050. By the way, because a lot of our constituents were demanding it. And so I get a little nervous about moratoriums on that infrastructure. And yet, at the same time, I spent a lot of my time in the legislature fighting for small towns to make sure they had the ability to do this basic work. And so it's both and. I agree with this. There's an abundance theory out there that says there's a false scarcity when you put in so many regulations. I get that because it was often getting in the way of how we could reach our emission goals and reductions. So I would say, look, then let's solve these problems. Let's make sure the Blandfords, I love the quote from the select board member. It said, we just feel like we're losing control of our town. Let's give them the resources that says, okay, great. Like, how do you negotiate your host agreement so that you can deal with the risks of fire or the other concerns you have? How do you make sure the state can give resources so that they can, which we do, by the way, in terms of legal challenges and the like, to give grants for
I think it's up to $150,000.
Exactly.
They have to have fewer than 7,500 people living there.
So what's the equivalent for making sure you can work through these proposals in a timely manner? So this, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. We should roll up our sleeves and solve the problem so that we can see this technology come in and we're not overwhelming towns.
Sarah Robertson, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, it's also just like I feel like the development in incentives to develop quickly are almost like forcing impractical decisions. Again, I'm looking at Wendell. They wanted to build or I think it was New Leaf actually, wanted to build a 100 megawatt battery facility in the middle of the woods. And no one had really considered the fact that Wendell doesn't have a municipal water supply. And you can't exactly fight fires at these facilities with water, but you need a constant supply to contain them. So Wendell doesn't have a 20-hour consistent running water supply. It would take every single, I'm exaggerating here, but it would take basically every fire truck in Franklin County to contain one battery fire at a facility like this.
And then perhaps that's why we're seeing places like Holyoke, which has had one online since 2017, these being more received more favorably in cities where you already have a dedicated infrastructure for these types of projects in an industrial area. All right, we have to move on. We could talk about this for the entire show. But still ahead here on the rundown, proposed federal changes to environmental wetlands protections and what that could mean for the 413. And you've been waiting for it, the ins and outs of pea cycling, coming up here on the rundown. I'm Carrie Saldus. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. We're still talking about the last segments. I am joined by Bill Shein, Sarah Robertson, Adam Hinds, and Greta Jochem. You can email us your thoughts at therundown@nepm.org. All right, here we go again. We're looking at reporting by Izzy Briers from the Berkshire Eagle. The headline, the EPA is out to redefine environmental protections for wetlands. It's a narrower definition with potentially broader consequences. Quoting here, starting in Cheshire, the Hoosic River watershed includes wetlands that are not always visible above ground. Some flow only during certain seasons, while others have move unseen underneath the surface, filtering pollutants, storing flood water, and supporting organisms like pollution-sensitive stoneflies. She goes on to say that under a federal rule proposed at the end of 2025, that is, many of those wetlands may no longer be protected. And when finalized, the new rule would advance the Trump administration's Powering the Great American Comeback initiative that seeks to cut red tape for American industry, development, and energy producers. All right, that's a lot of talking from me, but it gives us some sort of broad framework for this. The reason for the proposed change is that Administrator Lee Zeldin says the change would reduce costs and confusion for property owners and industry. Reduce costs, eliminate confusion, everybody wins, Adam Hinds.
Right. So this is another one where I think to the untrained eye, some of these spaces might look like, oh, it's a dried up stream, and what role does that play in our ecosystem? But ultimately, it probably does, whether it's absorption or habitat and beyond. And so one of the problems you often encounter is everyone feels like they're an expert. And so I think this is one of just the latest example of how states can and should stand up to these changes in the EPA. We saw it in Trump 1 with vehicle emission standards reduced, and we've seen it in endangerment findings and the like. And so Typically, and we've seen it already, the Attorney General taking the legal course. The states can collectively act together and take their own, efforts to increase regulations. And I think we should do the same again this time.
I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of wetlands and hows and whys, but just very simply, it was explained in the Eagle that wetlands really act as sponges, right? And I think that's highly relevant for us here in Western Massachusetts, who have seen great droughts followed by extensive flooding. So for me, I'm just keeping that front of mind while we're talking about all of this. Bill Shein, I looked at the EPA's own website, and it was interesting to look back at 2010 when we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Clean Air Act. And it said, quote, progress had been made. There's still work ahead. And it went on to say, as of 1990, the Clean Air Act prevented more than 200,000 premature deaths and almost 700,000 cases of chronic bronchitis were avoided. From 90 to 2010, total emissions of 6 principal air pollutants decreased by more than 41%. And this piece I thought was really interesting. The gross domestic product increased by more than 64%. Through continued innovation and successful implementation of the Clean Air Act, we will deliver even more benefits over the next 40 years. That was the EPA saying that. So how do you square that post from the EPA when we're talking about this particular act of clean water?
It's a different EPA. That's probably the most significant thing. What we've seen from Zeldin from the beginning, the priorities are really no longer what they used to be by a long shot. They've talked a lot about they call it reducing red tape, but they really are. They've rolled out the welcome mat for industry. He said, when I think not long after he became administrator, one goal was to make cars more affordable. Those are not always in alignment, out of the box with protecting the environment. They can be, and they should be, electric cars and so on. But it's another example. The clean water, the waters of the United States, it's been a legal battle now for many years, and they've really taken the side of industry, as much as we've ever seen, I think. Mm-hmm.
Next steps here. There was a public comment period on it. It has closed. It closed in January. So now all of that's being reviewed and will be sussed out into these final rules that are expected to be finalized at some point later this year. So more on that. We're going to move on now. And I feel like we've talked about some pretty weighty issues, so I feel okay with the segue I'm about to drop, which is that we're going to turn from wetlands to avoiding wet pants. That's right. We are going to talk about pee, everybody. Pee cycling. To be precise, Sarah Robertson, you reported this for the Shoestring, the online site, and the Montague Reporter. I'm going to quote here, up and down the Connecticut River Valley, agricultural runoff, wastewater treatment plants, and septic systems all contribute to an overabundance of nitrogen and phosphorus in the watershed, which can cause algal blooms, kill fish, and throw the ecosystem kind of out of whack, right? In summary, not good. However, there is a proposed solution, which is pea cycling. Sarah, what is pea cycling?
Peeing on your own garden.
But there's a company that's really getting involved here.
The Rich Earth Institute out of Brattleboro has been doing work and research in this for over a decade now, and they have, in many ways, are getting people to stop flushing their pee down the toilet and to save it and to either bring it to Brattleboro where they pasteurize it and they turn it into a fertilizer that is used on farm fields in the area, or just collect in their own homes and use it on their own gardens. And it's a really cool thing, honestly. Yeah. It's a little bit stinky, but they have ways around that, and they've invented different kinds of toilets and are doing international research with lots of other people around. But
It's this thing that really has sort of blown up my mind. I'm like, oh, we live in the 41P. Welcome to the Pioneer Valley. If we're expanding this and the collection becomes more concerted. But I mean, fun facts here, right? You point out in your reporting that human urine makes up less than 1% of the waste sent to a typical wastewater treatment plant, but accounts for almost 75% of the nitrogen and 60% of the phosphorus in these facilities. So it's a little bit that we're paying a ton to take out of water that shouldn't be there in the first place, because then it's really messing with fish and other living things that are in the water, right? Reaction from our panel here, Greta.
I loved this story. It made me think so much about something I had never thought of, pea recycling. Like, I never would have thought of that. And I read the story, and I thought, this is a great story. We should republish it, The Republican, because the shoestring allows republishing of their articles. And before I could even suggest it to my boss, he had already read it and had planned to republish it. So that was pretty fun.
Lots of ways for folks to connect with this story. But then the fertilizer piece really is very topical right now, because we've seen so much fertilizer held up at the Strait of Hormuz because of the war in Iran. Who knew that 1/3 of global fertilizer is coming out of that region? But if we're using urine to make fertilizer and not natural gas, potentially another environmental savings there. So lots of just fascinating layers. There's also a housing component, Sarah. So if you're collecting your pee, you could potentially be helping the housing sector. How?
You can increase capacity for septic systems. So one of the bottlenecks right now to the development of more housing is that you can't build an extra bedroom, or you can't build an accessory dwelling unit, what is called an ADU, because your septic system can't handle that capacity. But with systems like pea cycling, like gray water reclamation or composting toilets, you can reduce the demand on your septic system and build more housing.
Which is, Adam Hinds, go ahead. I saw you about to
Oh no,
jump in.
I'm just impressed. There's just a lot of wisdom in doing this approach,
Nice.
and you're in good hands with pea cycling.
I love that everyone jumps on the pun train with me.
You guys really came through today.
It's just fantastic. Well, keeping with that, next steps on this one, UGrow has, the company that's doing the fertilizer development, has been approved for use for sale in Massachusetts, and they're hoping to sort of explore more and do some other things here in Massachusetts. Sarah, tell us a little about
the
that.
news side of this story was that they recently got a grant from the Long Island Sound Futures Fund to implement this program in Franklin County. And I went to their kickoff meeting at the Sunderland Library a few weeks ago, and it was just an awesome group of people. The superintendent for Montague's wastewater treatment plant was there, and she is on board, or she wants to implement a pea cycling collection and treatment facility at the wastewater treatment facility. And so it's going to help them twofold. They're going to, if this comes to fruition, they're going to have less nitrogen and phosphorus they need to treat. And they're also going to have a fertilizer that they can give to farms in the area.
Bill Shein, are you ready to start collecting your pee and running up to Brattleboro?
I've been doing it for years. Now I have someplace to take it. I'm actually curious. I have a question about one of the issues with that we've seen is pharmaceuticals in wastewater. How do they handle that, or how's that addressed?
The Rich Earth Institute has been doing research on that. So far, what they found is that there's not a significant uptake into food of the pharmaceuticals that they've measured in urine, and it's much safer than biosolids, which is sewage sludge that is often or has been used as fertilizer as well. So pea is less filled with the nasty stuff than fertilizer made with everything that goes through a wastewater treatment plant.
It's a good slogan for it right there.
It's fascinating. And who knows if this goes beyond Massachusetts and becomes something that happens coast to coast, we could be living in what? Urination, folks.
Wow.
There we go.
That's right. The final pun here for this morning. I'm going to do a rapid fire round here in closing, and I want to have everybody talk about either one big idea you hope folks walk away with, or just one thing you're going to keep watching. Briefly, Bill Shein.
Well, actually, on my mind this morning was the Pulitzer Prize won by the Connecticut Mirror as a nonprofit news site, free to read. And in partnership with ProPublica. And I think that was good news for our region, and also just an example of how that model can produce really valuable journalism.
Yeah, and the importance of digging into stories, right? Sarah Robertson.
I kind of just want to share an anecdote from a story I reported this week for the Montague Reporter, just about there's so much pollution in our environment. And there's a lot of acronyms too. There's PCBs and there's PFAS.
PFAS, yeah.
Yes. And the Montague Center Water District recently got a $50,000 settlement from one of the major manufacturers of PFAS by accident, almost, because they got a piece of mail that was meant for a town in Montague, South Carolina, informing them of a lawsuit. But then after Montague Center contacted a lawyer, the lawyer was like, do you want to join this class action lawsuit? Because you also have PFAS. And it worked, and now they're involved in a few of them. And it's just there's so much contamination that we need to worry about these days.
And this reporting helps to bring it all to light. Adam Hinds.
Yep.
There's a movement that continues to gain steam in deliberative democracy and particularly civic assemblies, and several of the stories we talked about, whether it's how to handle PCBs in a local community or solar siting and beyond. It's a process where you can use technology and otherwise to get a representative sample of a constituency to really work through possible solutions, and it gains trust. It results in better solutions. And if I were still a state senator, I'd be using it for any major issue or small issue. It's really a good addition to our democracy.
Greta Jochem.
I have a question from my story about the green energy and batteries, which was, I thought, like, wow, this is kind of a messy process, but what are the consequences if we don't act? And so that's something I'm thinking about.
Well, more to come about that story, hopefully, here on The Rundown. You have been listening to The Rundown. Our anthem is by The Love Crumbs. Our board op today is Kara Foster, Ayu Suryawan on digital support and the YouTubes. I'm Carrie Saldo. Thanks so much for listening and watching this week. You can catch us every Friday here at 9 on 88.5 NEPM and streaming live on YouTube. Get out there and have a great Friday. Happy Mother's Day. Have a great weekend.